Hi, everybody. It's Bruce Lambert from howcommunicationworks.com. I want to talk today about the idea of radical honesty, radical transparency, radical truthfulness, and to talk about whether it's a good idea when running a business or in our personal relationships. And I want to contrast this idea with being tactful or being polite or being diplomatic. And this idea comes to me from a book called Principles by a guy named Ray Dalio. Now, if you've been paying attention to social media or the media, you've been seeing a lot about this book, Principles. It's been a bestseller. Ray Dalio is the founder of the world's largest hedge fund, a company called Bridgewater. A very successful man. He's a billionaire. And actually, I listened to the book on Audible. I really like the book. It's very interesting. The story of his life is very interesting. The book itself is interesting. And the idea that this is a guy that runs this company by all these principles, I think, is a fascinating idea in and of itself. But he has one, and I recommend the book to you. I'll put a link to it in the comments below. But the idea that I want to talk about today, which I think is one of the most controversial ideas in his book, is the idea that we should be radically honest or radically truthful or radically transparent. He says it in a couple of different ways. But the idea is that a lot of the energy we spend being polite, being tactful, trying not to hurt people's feelings is wasted energy. And that things would be better and our companies would run better and we could all be billionaires like him if we were more radically truthful with one another. I'm not sure about this. I don't think this is a particularly good idea. And I'll try to explain why. So first of all, I should say that this is the way he runs this company. By all accounts in the media and by other people who have talked to people who work in this company, who have worked there still or who worked there once and left it, this is in fact the way he runs this company based on these principles of radical honesty. And he tells stories in the book of where even junior employees in his company are allowed to directly and pretty harshly criticize him, the CEO and the founder of the company. And I have to say there's something admirable about that, about opening up yourself to really direct criticism of your subordinates. I think that's probably a good thing in a company. But the idea that everyone in a company is going to go around being sort of radically honest with one another seems really, really frightening to me. And I don't think in general is a very good idea. I'm reminded, what's that movie I think Jim Carrey was in where he can't lie anymore? He can only tell the truth. And we can see in that movie that our life is built around little white lies, often shading the truth. And we do it not to be evil. We do it to protect people's feelings. So I think that Dalio, in his desire, he wants to build in his company what he calls an idea meritocracy. So an idea meritocracy is one in which all the best ideas rise to the top. And he believes that in order to have an idea meritocracy where the best ideas win, you have to have this radical honesty, radical transparency, radical truth-telling, whatever you want to call it. He thinks the two go together. I admire the idea of an idea meritocracy. I'm a scientist. I like to believe that science is an idea meritocracy and that the best ideas eventually win. I know that that's not completely true. I know there are other power, money, all sorts of things can influence what ideas are ultimately successful. But Dalio thinks telling the truth, not being afraid of hurting people's feelings, is the way to do it. But I think, frankly, this would be disastrous in most people's lives. And I think it was even disastrous for Ray Dalio. But he is honest enough to admit it. So my criticism of this idea of radical honesty isn't necessarily a criticism of Ray Dalio. As I said, I like the book. I find he narrates his own book on Audible. It's really entertaining, and you can't help but admire what he's accomplished. But I think this idea of telling the truth all the time would just be disastrous in most circumstances. And in fact, he talks about in his own company, about a third of the people hate this idea of radical honesty and leave very quickly. They get hired by this company. It's a very desirable company to work for because it's the biggest hedge fund in the world. You make a lot of money working there. But a third of the people get exposed to this radical truth-telling and just leave quickly within the first 6 months or the first year or something like that. He says about a third of the people immediately like this idea and they last and they're really happy. And he says about a third of the people learn to be radically honest themselves and eventually adapt to this kind of unusual corporate culture. So even there we can see that this radical honesty is not for everybody. But even more telling, Ray Dalio tells a story of what happened to him in his own company. In 1993, his radical honesty, another word for this, we sometimes say people are brutally honest. When we say people are brutally honest, we mean that they say things without regard to our feelings. They think that if it's the truth, it's worth saying. And often we run as fast as we can away from people like this. If somebody tells me they're the brutally honest sort of person, I sort of say, nice to meet you, and I don't really want to hang out with them anymore. I certainly wouldn't want to hire them or work with them if they claim to be brutally honest. I think brutal honesty is exactly what it sounds like. It's brutal, and it's brutal to be around. It's brutal to be on the receiving end of. So anyway, in 1993, Dalio tells a story that his colleagues, his closest colleagues in the company, had to write him a memo because his behavior was so out of control. And in the memo, they said that his radical honesty was causing people to feel incompetent, unnecessary, humiliated, overwhelmed, belittled, oppressed, and otherwise bad. So incompetent, unnecessary, humiliated, overwhelmed, belittled, oppressed, and otherwise bad. Yeah, right, exactly. That's what happens when you're brutally honest. When you're radically transparent, you're disregarding people's feelings. This idea of radical honesty is great in principle, but it ignores the fact that people have feelings or that people have identities. It ignores, if you've been watching some of my other videos or reading a blog, it ignores this idea of face. So the sociologist Irving Goffman says, face, it's the positive social value we claim for ourselves. It's the idea that I am somebody. I'm somebody who deserves respect. And there's two aspects of face. It's the desire to be liked and approved of, for my wants to be wanted by other people. That is, I want you to like me. I want you to approve of me. I want you to think I'm a good person. I want you to treat me with respect. And the other part is the desire to be left alone. So radical honesty threatens both of these, especially when we're criticized with radical honesty, which is mostly, I think, what happens in Dalio's version of radical honesty. It means freedom to criticize people at work bluntly without regard to their feelings. What happens is people end up feeling incompetent, unnecessary, humiliated, overwhelmed, belittled, oppressed, etc. You're disregarding their feelings. You're just violating the basic human desire, the universal human desire to be liked and approved of. That is, Dalio doesn't fully appreciate it. He does, he's a very smart guy, but this principle, I don't think, fully acknowledges the importance of face, this desire not to lose face, not to be humiliated, not to be regarded as if we're not liked, we're not approved of, as if our feelings don't matter. So I guess he might say something like, well, everyone knows we care about them. We're a big family. He talks a lot about how everyone in the company is a family. We're a big family. We pay you well. We take care of you. We have good benefits. So that's the way we show we care about you. So in the context of this criticism, you shouldn't get your feelings hurt because you should understand that we care about you based on all this other stuff that we do. But that's sort of like being in a relationship and saying to someone, insulting them, say, you smell bad, you look ugly, your butt looks big in those pants. And then, or going to your mother-in-law's house and saying, this Thanksgiving dinner, the turkey tastes terrible. And then expecting that their feelings won't be hurt because in every other way you show that you love them. It just doesn't work that way. People want to be respected basically all the time. They don't ever want to feel that their feelings are being disregarded. And I think the principle of radical honesty just doesn't recognize this. And the sociologists who study face and politeness, they find that it's culturally universal. That is, this idea of face, the positive social value that we claim for ourselves, this idea that I am somebody worth being respected, cuts across cultures. There are no human beings who don't want to be respected in this basic way, that to acknowledge that they have feelings, that criticism would hurt them, and therefore that we should exercise tact and diplomacy and social skill. So in fact, politeness is a whole set of culturally universal strategies that we use to show this ritual kind of respect to one another. So saying please, saying excuse me. On the blog, I've talked a lot about the 4 basic politeness strategies. So say something bald on the record. That's the least polite way to do anything. So that's like if you go to grandma's house and she doesn't like, and you don't like the taste of her Thanksgiving dinner, you say, "Grandma, this turkey sucks." That's bald on the record. But you wouldn't do that. It's so impolite. You only would be that direct, like in a crisis. If I had to say, fire, if there's a fire and there's great urgency, then efficiency trumps tact or the need to be diplomatic. But Dalio pretends that there's never any contrast or never any tension between the need to be tactful and the need to be efficient. And he just places all the value on efficiency. But this tension between the need to be efficient on the one hand and the need to be tactful on the other hand never goes away. It's a fundamental part of human social interaction. This tension has been described in a bunch of different ways. Some communication theorists in the 60s said there's 2 levels of any interaction: the task level of the interaction and the relational level of the interaction. So that's like the efficiency level and the feelings level or the relationship level. And the tension between them never goes away. Those 2 levels are always there. So in our language choices, we always have to attend both to the task and to the relationship. Dalio just says we're going to have a principle that we're only going to attend to the task. And you should know based on other factors that we love you and care about you. But at work, we're not going to attend to the relational level of meaning. We're just going to attend to the task. But this doesn't work. In the book Crucial Conversations, which is a nice book about difficult conversations, which I may review another time, they talk about this as being the difference between telling the truth or keeping a friend. And they say the key to being successful in life and in business is be able to say difficult things and still keep your friendships. And I think this is the essence of what's going on. This tension cannot go away. We can't just assert that there's some principle of radical honesty and that start being brutally honest and critical of people without regard to tact and diplomacy and their feelings and think that everything's going to be okay because we have this principle. I don't think the world works that way. I think a fundamental and critical aspect of communication skill is learning how to say difficult, face-threatening things. That is, where the content is inherently threatening to the other person's identity. It could have the potential to make them feel bad because it criticizes their value or their performance or something, or their appearance or something. We have to learn to say those things in such a way that the relationship is preserved. So the essence of communication skill is learning to say difficult things tactfully. We can't just avoid tact, avoid diplomacy by asserting some principle. I wish that the social world was that simple, that I could just say to people exactly what I felt, criticize them bluntly, and then when their feelings got hurt, just tell them, "Oh, there's a principle of radical honesty here. Your feelings can't get hurt." It doesn't work that way. So that's my main point. The book is really interesting. You should read it or listen to it and make up your own mind. It's called Principles by Ray Dalio. But I think his idea of radical honesty is not fundamentally sound, and I don't recommend it. I recommend you learn politeness, you learn tact, you learn diplomacy, and I'll link to some articles on my blog that talk about how exactly politeness works and some strategies for saying difficult things and still preserving your relationships. Thanks so much for listening. There'll be more here soon. So if you like this, please subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to my mailing list on the website, howcommunicationworks.com. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you soon.